Welcome to the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions. This program is dedicated to featuring authors and experts from around the world who will share their knowledge and insight with you, the viewing and listening audience. Literacy and education are the keys to freedom, and diversity enables one to live in a world with broader perspectives. This is Donna Sebo, and I will be your host for the next hour. Welcome. I am delighted you are joining me today because we are going to be talking about the power of words and how they relate to history. Now, I have some very special guests, both of whom have been on my radio programs, the Donna Sebo Radio Show. And with this program, you actually get to see them in person. Yes. Who are they? Well, we have Richard Fallquist. And this is a gentleman that has quite a background when it comes to working with data, information, and we're going to find out more about him in just a moment, where you get to meet him. And then the other gentleman is Ray Deptula. Now, we have Ray. He's in from Florida. Both of the gentlemen are on Zoom. So we're going to be talking with them via technology that we take for granted anymore today. And boy, I can remember days, and I'm not that old, but I can remember days when this would not have been possible at all. But you know what? With technology today, we're able to talk with people around the world, and that I've been able to do with this programming, and oh, it's so much fun. It really is. Because when you have a chance to see people in person, then it makes a very special relationship, especially when you find out that they are authors. Authors are featured both on my television show and my radio programming. Richard, I'm going to come to you first. Welcome to the show. You're here in Tacoma, where we're getting bombarded with rain and thunderstorms and all kinds of different things happening. I know we've got Ray up on the screen, Ray Deptula, and then we've got Richard Fallquist. Richard, if we could switch to Richard first, because I want to chat with him. That will be absolutely terrific. And I think we've got a problem with the camera in the studio. So anyway, Ray, for some reason, we're not able to get over to Richard right at the moment, so we're going to start with you.
Okay.
And I want to welcome you to the show. And Ray, you have such a fascinating background because you were in the Navy for 24 years. Your background involves being a political military specialist. You were in Europe, and you also did so much reading. History has always been fascinating to you. And you've written 2 books, and they are historical novels. And it is absolutely fabulous. A Dog Before a Soldier. When I saw that title, I thought, that's a pretty cool title, saying a dog before a soldier. When you started deciding to write these books, what was that like for you?
Well, I have to tell you that I wrote the book originally as a single book and then split it in half. And the original title of the book was Damned Yankees. And my literary agent talked me into splitting the book in half, and then we renamed the series Those Damned Yankees. And then she said, well, you have to come up with 2 new titles of the book for the 2 books. And I kind of panicked. But you know, the Dog Before a Soldier has to do with an old British naval saying about those in the Army. And it was a shipmate before a messmate before a stranger before a dog, and a dog before a soldier, meaning that they considered British soldiers at the time, you know, the lowest form of human being on the earth, even lower than a dog. But I originally got the idea some time ago when I was transitioning from being a naval aviator. And at a certain point, the Navy pushes you out of the cockpit, and they turned me into a political military officer, which is kind of a foreign policy development guy. And they sent me to a year study at the Naval War College, where we studied not war itself, but just the political relationships of what causes war for governments, how they get themselves into those situations to begin with. And I became fascinated with the subject, and it wasn't a fascination that I knew I had. And when I was there, I took a Revolutionary War elective. We were there in Newport, Rhode Island, so right smack in the middle of where that started. And the professor, the premise of the course was, those who fight their nation's wars are those who can least avoid it. And that just struck me. And I said, I've always wanted to write. And then I said, okay, this is my book right here. And that's where I got the idea when I was studying back about 25 years ago, actually, at the Naval War College.
Well, English history. Now, something you did with your novels that I found extremely fascinating is that you actually represented both sides, Ray. You represented the side that is of the English soldier. And then you represent, because you start off your book with Jack going into, after being at sea for 3 years, I believe it was, going into the home environment in England, which was absolutely the dregs of humanity. We'd call it the slums, the ghettos. It's where the poorest of the poor lived. Prostitution reigned. There was all kinds of ugly situations that exist in the slums, as we described them. So you start that off in your book, and he goes home. He's been at sea. Now, he's a teenager. And he goes to sea because he wanted to escape from home. He's gone for 3 years. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, and he was actually convinced to go home by a guy on the ship that said, "Don't turn out like me. If you have a family, go home. Otherwise, you're going to end up being like me." And he kicked him off the ship.
Mm-hmm. Kicked him off the ship. He goes home, and the description that you give in the book about him going home and what he finds, it's even worse than when he left 3 years before. And then, now he's in England. Jack is England. He's in England. And by golly, he ends up being recruited by someone, and he signs up just because it's the only hope he has of getting out of this hideous environment that he thought might have improved by the time he came home. But it didn't. Now, we're talking about the 1700s here. Life was rugged at best in the 1700s.
Well, to be honest with you, what interested me about that whole subject, yes, I did that, and I wanted to portray that a lot of people, I would say most people that went into the British Army, came from desperate situations, and that's where they got a lot of those people. But to be honest with you, that situation happens today. You would be surprised at the number of people who come into the military, and I've seen them, and I was even one of them. They had no better place to go, and they end up in the military, by whatever means, and they turn out better for it. But they don't come in. They don't come in because they're somehow patriotic. They come in because they need a means to support themselves. And for many, many people, even today, and I think this is a timeless story. They come into the military because they're somewhat desperate.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating how the story itself gives a portrayal that I think makes it really interesting to the reader, because you have so much accuracy in this historical novel about the times, what it was like on the ships, and very, very hard life. And those ships, it took sometimes years to reach one port or another, and it really was very, very difficult, and a lot of lives were lost at sea because it was just very turbulent. Now, with that, when you did that, in your first book, like you said, you had to divide it into two, and you had to have two titles. So you have the first book, which is A Dog Before a Soldier, and then the second book is about I Can't Find My Way Home. And that is very powerful. So I want to switch over to Richard for a moment here and share some of the information about what Richard has done. I'm going to be going back and forth between the two of you. Richard, your book surprised me when I got it, because I thought, a book of lists? Now, your background is really something, Richard, because you are a man that you're very analytical. You've dealt with data processing. You've been involved with so many different aspects of technical dispositioning. And my thought was, a list? My goodness, how are we going to talk about a list? But there is so much in your book with that list that I found really fascinating. You've retired and you decided to do this book. Why? Why did you decide to do your book on the list?
I was a consulting actuary for 50 years and really had very little time to read. And when I retired, I decided that I wanted to read some fiction. And I decided to choose the classics. And so what I did is I ordered a couple of books from Amazon, and I started reading the Divine Comedy, and I realized early on that it would have been quite a challenge to get through the Divine Comedy and then move on to the Canterbury Tales. So what I did is I sat down and looked at some videos on the Divine Comedy and on the Canterbury Tales, and I found that really interesting. I was able to learn quite a bit about those two books, and then make the decision to either watch the movie or read the book further or whatever. So that's kind of how it all started. And then I of course made some lists of these various books and throughout the centuries, and then I switched and made some lists on art and music and operas and what have you, plays. So it just developed into what started out as kind of a personal goal, just turned into a book of exciting things to discover.
Now, your book is titled Authors of Great Works and Me, Enhancing Your Life with Classics, Literature, Music, Art. You have so many different lists in there, and you used some interesting terms when I was reviewing your material. You talked about your bucket list, and then there was also a term about speed launch that you used. Now, your bucket list, it was part of your planning, wasn't it, to be able to do exactly what you were doing, reading materials that you just didn't have a chance to read before.
Right. Yeah, it started out with just a few of the books, and then it just expanded and expanded to beyond I was initially really interested in the Greek and Roman classics, and then it just expanded from there.
So with the classics, you were interested in that, but you also were very interested in the opera, which I associate with classical material myself, because so much of it was written so very, very long ago, and it does entail history. And as someone once expressed to me that opera, for example, is like the rock and roll of that era. The era
Right.
it was so popular. Well, we think of rock and roll, and of course we've got Elvis Presley and a number of other individuals we take care of remembering. But the truth is, that was significant. Those people that were performing on the stage at that time were portraying things about their lives, everyday life. Those plays and operas were just very, very significant. What was one of your favorites?
Operas. Um, I liked I liked a lot of them actually. I think Carmen was my favorite, and of course Carmen was just recently shown here at the Seattle Opera, which was really fun. Um, with the operas, it was interesting because when I was working, I'd listen to arias, and um, and then after I started writing my book and made my lists of 100 operas. Since then, I've probably seen um, probably 15 to 20 of the top 25 operas. So my book has really enhanced my knowledge and appreciation of operas that I really didn't have when I was just initially listening to arias. So,
Do you
and the book kind of does that in all the different sections. If you go into the artists and their masterpieces, it's really fun to go through the lists and and begin to identify the different classic works of each of these artists. And the same with the composers. Like when I started through the composers lists, um, I got I got to Chopin, and I just couldn't believe how much I enjoyed Chopin. Which my list, my work allowed me to delve into and just thoroughly enjoy.
When
The
when you were doing this, when you were going through the process, because your book is very, very, very easy for people to go through, and you have your different lists, which, let's face it, your analytical background that you were so much engaged with for most of your professional life really had a big influence on that capacity for organization, didn't it?
I think I think it helped. Um, and of course, for what I essentially do is like if I had a list of 100 that I had created, and then I decided I wanted to, I'd explore like maybe 7 or 8 of the top 20. And then I'd write about that 7 or 8, and I'd list the YouTubes that I thought were the most effective to gain some significant knowledge on each of those top 8.
With the research that you did, and of course, it's what I call the fun kind of research because you were living it. You were reading the material, you were enjoying the material. Sometimes I'm sure you came across some things that you thought, not today, this isn't for me. I'm not going to read this today, it's not going to work. But that it really causes you to think about the relevancy of the world we're living today, and human behavior hasn't changed very much, has it, when you read a lot of the classics?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the things that were written about centuries ago are still definitely relevant in today's society. That's for sure.
When you are sharing this with other people, and I know you have gotten some very, very positive feedback from many individuals when they found out about your book, which I think is wonderful. As an author, we always appreciate recognition. When you were doing that and you're interacting with people, is it something that you find that there's an area of your lists that you have, because you have a number of them in the book, that people find more fascinating than another part of the list?
I think they really like my chapter on um, why get involved in the great works. Um, that you can tie literature and art and music to your own personal life. And I think that's fascinating. Um, a lot of the reviewers like the lists of the 18th century, the 19th century, those books back then, and the top books that were written. And many of them talk about wanting to revisit those books, so, and explore new ones.
I think it's always interesting to see what people are drawn to, what they are drawn to, and what it really is significant. Now, Ray, I'm coming to you because your books intrigued me so much, because I've done some reading about English history and the soldiers. And when I was reading your material, as I mentioned before when we were chatting, I noticed how you were focused on representing both sides of the war, both sides, the men, what they went through, what it was like for them. And I know there were some parts of your book that actually brought me to tears, because it represents something that is very much a soldier's world today. And it reminded me of World War II. And there's that famous Christmas story where it was peace, and all the soldiers came up out of their foxholes and their trenches, and they were sharing food with each other, they were talking with each other, they weren't hating each other. And then when time was up, okay, now we're gonna kill each other. And it brings it forward so vividly. In your research, when you were overseas in Europe, did you have access to libraries that gave you information on historical information that you have in your book?
I did have access to libraries, but to be honest with you, when I was living in Europe, I learned more just from observing. I lived in Germany 3 years, and I would go to churches in little towns, and there would always be memorials out and back of World War I and World War II soldiers from that village that had been killed, and most of them were killed in Russia. So you can learn a lot, just from walking around and talking with people and just looking around. And to be honest with you, I never once remember going to a library to do any research. But so the research I did was more from just some reference material, nonfiction reference material that I picked up along the way, about slavery, about the Revolutionary War. And I want to also make a comment. I want to make a couple comments. First of all, Richard reminded me that I hate operas. I'd rather chew on my belt than go watch an opera. But everybody's the same. But the second thing I want to point out is that I wanted to write this book. Most war pieces are written from one perspective. It's usually, okay, we're the good guys, you're the bad guys. And I wanted to approach this similar to the way that I learned at the Naval War College, where we just looked at conflicts, and we started with the Peloponnesian Wars, more than 3,000 years ago. And we looked at it just from a very analytical point of view, not caring, what side was right or wrong, but just, how did this happen? What were the factors? And so I took that approach in writing this particular book, not wanting to portray anybody as the good guy or the bad guy. Just it is what it is. And then the other common theme is that it doesn't really matter, what side you're on. People in the military, soldiers and sailors, are the same, no matter who they're fighting for, or working for, or attached to. And most of them don't really care, or don't really understand what it is they're fighting for. Their motivation is to survive and to make a living and to do a good job and to protect those around them. And that's that's the reason they do anything. And that's pretty common. It's common no matter what military you go to. I've worked with many militaries, and we're all pretty much interchangeable in that respect. So that I really, if you got that out of the book, then I did a good job, because that's really what I wanted to portray.
Well, I am reflecting as you're speaking on a scene, a battle, because this is the 1700s. We are celebrating here in the United States the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. All of this was evolving. What I was shocked to learn is that the war, I got history when I was a kid. I was not aware that when all of that political stuff was going on, there was this horrific amount of battling that was occurring. And that is something I think so many people are not aware of. It wasn't until the 1880s that it finally ended. So we have the celebration about the accomplishment of a written document and people coming together, but at the same time, you have the battles going on with the Indians who are betrayed. You have the English that are coming in and saying, because of King George, and that's another part of your book that's really eye-opening, is good old King George. And you have the decision-making that's going on thousands of miles away. Thousands of miles away. And he has no clue about what's really happening in the Americas. And my gracious, most people actually in the United States at that time were supportive of the English. They were happy to be under the king stuff, but they got used to being independent and they didn't like being taxed. And that's, the Boston Tea. You go into so much detail about that and the feelings of people on both sides. And this is documented. This isn't something that just came through your brain. This is something that really was going on at the time. All of these different levels in the historical time frame that were evolving. Incredible.
One thing that interested me, and one thing that Americans might be interested in, if you take a look at the British experience in the colonies at the time, it was very much like our experience in Vietnam, where we're making decisions, political decisions, thousands of miles away. Do we really know what's going on over there? We had a very dysfunctional relationship between the military, the population, and the government. Not on the same page. If you compare that to World War II, very different. So, and we were taking on an inferior foe that really, how could we not lose to someone who's still fighting with sticks? But it didn't turn out well for us. A lot of it was because of our own decisions, and it was the same. It was very much the same with Great Britain. They didn't quite understand. Every decision they made it worse. They let the French get in. Pretty soon it was a domestic uprising in a city in Boston that goes, turns into a global conflict. That's a pretty horrendous mistake to make, and so I wanted to draw a lot of parallels between their experience in the colonies and our experience in Vietnam, because I think it was very, very similar. Mm-hmm. And I think something maybe that a lot of Americans might be able to relate to.
See, that is where I think having historical fiction and historical information can make such a difference. That's why reading is so important. Instead of being myopic about looking at something, gee, we're doing this and we're the good guys. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because on both sides, it's been my observation, bad things happen on both sides. We saw that in our Civil War that occurred here in the United States, very much so. I want to go back over to Richard for a moment, and then I'll be coming back to you, Rod, because I want to talk about this other book the second book of your series as well, because Jack is the primary character. And Jack is the one that is going through all of these experiences. And there comes that point where he does something totally unexpected. And I want to come back to that. But I want to go over to Richard for a moment. Richard, I know that you were having an interesting challenge. You have had an interesting challenge when you have someone that says, I hate opera.
Well, he may like another chapter. Maybe,
You know, I
maybe,
absolutely love
Greek and
that.
Roman classics might
I
be
still,
okay.
Well,
I'll still read the book.
Yeah, I was wondering what the war, what number the war was. I was going to check that.
no,
That's
I think this is just terrific. Now, Richard, when you were talking about the classics, and you have the Iliad, you have so many stories relative to Spartans, and the Greeks are so significant in literature relative, I think, to the Western world, because so much of what the Greeks in their golden age represented to the Western world, especially Americans, was something we want to know about freedom. We want to know about this, that, or the other. And it's amazing. Look at how long it's taken us to get where we are when you think about it. But it had a big impact on the average American in a big way. Those that were able to read, and I'd say a good 90%, if not more, of the population in early America, they did not have literacy in their lifestyle at all.
right. I think what the Greeks did with their myths and their um, r- reading about life in this, in almost in the stars, putting together their civilization, and of course the Romans then grabbed a lot of that, and it just moved throughout the world. What the Greeks initially learned and taught. Um, so, and I was going to say, your book was number 23 on my list, so it's up pretty high. so, uh,
But when you
but
come to history with Greece, what's one of your favorites that you have had the chance to read at this time?
oh, well, I haven't probably read any of them because they're probably too long. But I've probably watched a movie or two, or
Aha.
I've watched a lot of YouTubes. I really like the Odyssey. I'm anxious to see that movie that's coming out in another month. I like the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid, about Aeneas in the Trojan War, moving to Carthage and on to supposedly the founding of Rome. Um, there's just so I loved Ulysses. The it's just amazing that I must have my lists are long, and I watched so many YouTubes, and it seems like just everything was a thrill. I love Richard III and the movie The Hollow Crown. Um, it just goes on and on, and I I think I hope that my book impacts readers that pick it up like it has impacted me. Um, they can start wherever they want. They can move forward as long as it becomes a journey in their life. I know it will enhance their life significantly.
When you are when you were making up the list, and I'm sure you could make up even more lists, and that may even be a second book for you to be able to consider things that when people get through reading everything that you've recommended, and you've got a number of lists.
Right.
But you know who comes to my mind that I think is especially significant, and that is Shakespeare.
Yes.
And Shakespeare, there's all kinds of commentaries about, did he actually write it? Is it someone else? Was it Francis Bacon that wrote the plays? I mean, there's been all kinds of conjectures through the generations since his plays became so famous. But they were the movies, the stage productions were the movies of the day. People would go there, they'd stand watching the plays on stages that were very crudely constructed. But the everyday person had a chance to get a release, if you will. And that's what a lot of us do when we watch movies, don't we? We will just relax and we're engrossed in a story. And that's what Shakespeare gave to his generation. And I like to think that that stimulated some kind of a literacy, a love of reading that was encouraged among those of the lower classes because it was a very distinct class system in England. And with Shakespeare and with people in France, throughout Europe, very distinct class, situations. And I think that Shakespeare, The Taming of the Shrew, there's just so many, Macbeth. I mean, there's performers that do these old plays even today, and they get into them. Richard Burton, I know, was in a movie on Macbeth that was just absolutely incredible, and his rich voice, and just, oh my goodness. And you're either moved to tears, but it's very emotional. Surprisingly, those plays have a big impact, but they even speak to today's environments of the human character, don't they?
Oh, I think they do. It's just amazing that Shakespeare has survived and flourished, even up through today, and while his plays are difficult to understand, they still are a major part of our literature, our great literature. So.
When you were writing these lists, and the book is just very, very easy to go through and very easy for people to refer to, but when you were doing it, were you primarily wanting to do this for authors, or did you hope that the young people would also pick up on it and would want to be able to engage in reading them?
Well, I mentioned in my book that when I was putting it together, I was actually just thinking about my grandchildren. That I was hoping that they would add the great works to their lives, and I do feel that to the extent our youth could get more involved, would put their phones down and spend more time maybe learning about Shakespeare or Pride and Prejudice or Chopin or whatever, I think it would certainly enhance the lives of our youth today.
Now with you, when you were a young person, were you an avid reader? Were you a reader yourself?
No.
You weren't a reader yourself, okay.
I was spending more time out in the yard riding my bike, probably. So
Yeah.
I wasn't sitting reading a book.
Now, see, that's the difference. With me, I had a book in hand, and my father would often scold me. He said, "Would you please put the books down?"
Put that book down. I
Yes,
know.
from as far back as I can remember, books were my focus, and they still are today because I love them.
I think I told you the story about I had a visitor one day at the house and his wife, and I handed her a list, my book, and she went to the 19th century list, and she started down the first 25 that I have, and she said, "I read this one, I read this one, I read this one, I read this one." And when we got done with the 25, she had read 20 of the books out of the 25.
Wow.
So I guess she was definitely a reader.
Yes. So that must have been an interesting conversation after she made that.
Yeah, that was really fun.
That was really
fun
a
to have
lot
her go
of
through
fun.
that list and say, "I read this one, I read this one, I read this."
It must have been a very interesting visit after you found out about that.
So I should add that, I also have a chapter on the Bible in my book. That
yes, you do.
I think is fascinating because I kind of approach the Bible not so much as from the religious standpoint, but more from the part of our Western culture. Mm-hmm. And I've put videos in there that allow somebody to basically do a speed launch through the Bible if they so choose, which is really fun. I mean, you could look at a YouTuber or two on Matthew and have really a good understanding of what the book of Matthew is about. And I think that's really a fun chapter in my book for people to um, think about.
Well, you present a couple of different ideas. You are combining the technologies of today. You're saying, here I have these lists, you have some options, and those options are available to you through YouTube, through, you can go to your library. There's many different ways that you can have
Right.
access to information. And if you're one of these people that you've got a 30-second brain scan capability, then you'll say, well, I want to have the video, or maybe even an audio book. There is something that is going to be available. We've got so much that's accessible today that
I know,
was very
I know we
difficult.
do, and we just need to take advantage of that accessibility.
Yes.
My book is basically an invitation. It's not a lecture. I'm not a PhD in humanities. I'm an actuary, so it's just an invitation to explore one great work at a time, to make it part of your life.
Well, one of the comments that you made in your book is books are mirrors, and I'm going to quote it. Books are mirrors in which we see ourselves in the lives of others. This is the power of literature, the treasure of the classics. And I would say that probably is a very good statement, because I think the only way we can really understand how to deal with life is by going into the past and into the history that is available to us from so many different cultures. It's not just one. There are just so many cultures we can learn from. And I think that is just so liberating. That's why I love what
Yeah,
I
I
do.
like it. I like that quote about the mirror. I think it's really interesting
I do
because
too.
it's true.
And I'm going to skip over to Ray now, because I want to share the information, because his information is about history, and it's American history. And because of what we're celebrating this year, the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, then his book gives an insight into things that most of us wouldn't give 5 cents worth of attention to. Ray, when I finished your first book, and you told me you had the second one, that it had been finished, and this had just come out fairly recently. And you sent it to me, and this is where I can't find my way home. And I saw that title, and I said, oh boy, here we go. But you go into so much depth of what was happening here in the United States. Lafayette, you mentioned Lafayette. You mentioned the German commander that helped Washington, that enabled the soldiers to be trained, because really the Americans at that time that were fighting, they were from the lower class. They were hoping maybe they'd get fed, and most of them didn't, because it was a desperate time. And they weren't even trained on soldiering. And the Brits, they had military discipline to the nth degree, but it was guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla, and that's my terminology, guerrilla warfare that was used by the Americans. They had learned it from the Indians. They had absorbed things. This is what they had to do to survive. Stuff going on in Canada. I mean, this second half of your series is incredibly intense.
Yeah. So, one of the parallels again with Vietnam was that, the Vietnamese used guerrilla warfare against us, and it worked. We used guerrilla warfare against the British, because to do otherwise would have been suicidal. We did train ourselves, and particularly when the French came in to help us, Washington was able to train his standing army to a point where at times they could stand toe to toe with the British, and they did on a couple of occasions. But for the most part, Washington's job was to avoid a big pitched battle with the British, because he would have lost. Not only would have lost, he would have been wiped out. And he understood that in order to keep the movement going, he had to have an army he had to have an army, and his job was to survive. He fought when he could, and he usually fought kind of on the fringes because Washington was first and foremost a very aggressive leader that wanted very much to fight, but was under no illusion that to do so would have been the end of him. So, and in particular, what most Americans don't realize is that the war was mainly won in the southern provinces when the British decided to go down, invade the South, because they thought, they never understood the whole time that there weren't as many loyalists as they thought that were going to come out of the woodwork to help them, and they were their own worst enemy because they created people to turn against them everywhere they went because of the way they behaved and their assumptions. But when they went down south, they had assumed that it was going to be easy pickings for people to support them, and it turned out to be just the opposite. And there were a lot of internal clashes between Americans in the South, between militias made up of Americans that fought each other constantly. Mm-hmm. And they just got dragged down in the South. They just got worn down to the point where they were decimated and had to leave, and made a mistake of getting bottled up in Yorktown. And that's where Washington caught them with the French. But the war was really won in the South. It was very nasty down there. A lot of violence, a lot of American and really American on American violence is what I'm talking about. And I think that we don't get enough of that education as we should, because we typically think that the conflict, it did start in New England, but as soon as it became a formal conflict, it quickly moved away from New England, and the last third of it was fought in the South, and that's where it was won for us.
Mm-hmm. Also, the main character, Jack is quite a fine young man, and throughout the book, his thoughts are italicized, so people are able to see very, very quickly these are his thoughts. He's not vocalizing them because he actually is a very shy person. But he meets up in the second book with another young man whose name is Curtis. He's a black man, he's a freedman, but he works for a master. And there is a powerful, powerful conversation that you have between the two of them, because Jack has converted over to the American side. He thinks war is absolutely stupid, it is awful, and he is appalled at the things that he sees, and he reaches a point where he ends up enlisting on the American side. And there's also another powerful conversation in there where the situation of being him accepted by an American, he very succinctly says, gee whiz, I don't see anybody winning on either side. That's the sum of it, basically. He thought both sides were losing terribly. And he saw these awful, awful things going on. And throughout the book, this is a young man that's in constant conflict because he really, the only thing that he wants is to be with a family, and that's really the center of his heart.
It's funny that you mentioned the italics. Let me comment on that first, because when I first wrote the book, initially I had none of that, and then when I split the book in half, I had an editor that helped me do that, and he convinced me, because look, you got to put your main character's thoughts down, and I said I don't want to do that because that's going to open a can of worms, and we fought, and finally he convinced me to do it. So I was very hesitant to do it, and I did it in a very minimal way, and almost to kind of hide it. So I'm glad that you liked it, because I didn't like the idea of doing it, but I think to hear that it meant something to you is important to me. The other thing that I want to mention is that Jack, he's manipulated into going into the Continental Army because he's taken in by a wealthy landowner in Annapolis after he deserts from the British Army. And he doesn't want to go back and fight. He thinks those days are over. But the wealthy landowner who's a colonel in the militia is drafted. There was a draft by the Continental Congress at the time, the lottery. His number is chosen, and he's drafted into the Continental Army on the Maryland side by Congress as a colonel. He doesn't want to go. And this is where my premise comes in. Those who fight their nation's wars are typically those who can least avoid it. Well, he can avoid it because he manipulates Jack and Custis into taking his place as surrogates, along with a nice donation of goods. And so he trades places. And so and he offers Jack, the hand of his daughter. He said, if you will do this for me, you can come back and be in this family, and I'll let you marry my daughter. So he doesn't trick Jack, but he offers him a deal, and Jack can't turn that down. He loves Priscilla, the man's daughter. He's been there a year, and he very much wants to be in a family where he's never had. So he takes the deal and goes off to fight in the Continental Army. But he does it just as a means to an end. He could care less about the politics. In fact, he doesn't understand why these people in these provinces who have so much is a huge middle class, the exact opposite of what he had grown up with in England. Why are they even fighting to begin with? But I'm going to do it because it's a means to get back, and have a family that I never had. So, and along the way, he also, he becomes attached to Custis, who he admires. Custis has a lot of good qualities. He's literate, he's smart. He does a lot of things that Jack cannot. So he protects Custis because people are constantly trying to take Custis. He's a black man that's treated as a commodity, not a human being. And so Jack develops a real, relationship for him as a friend, and won't go back without him. And so that's basically the story in the second book. Them trying to get their way back to Annapolis, so they can't find their way home because they get displaced from the army, and they're in the very volatile South. And how do they find their way back? And so that right there, in a nutshell, is the story.
Mm-hmm. There is so much in your book that I found very heart-wrenching because you related so much there. And I know that this, in part, was what you wanted to let people be aware of, that this is a part of American history, and to be able to present it in a novel form, giving them information. And I know that we've got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to be sure that we're able to bring Richard in along with you, Ray, because both of you, in your own ways, even though you're, Ray, a historical novelist, Richard is someone that has put material together relative to history of the Greeks and other people, different time zones, the 15th through the 20th century, for being aware of other cultures, other people, other situations. And so the two of you, when I thought of having the two of you on the show, I was just so pleased because I like people to know how valuable reading is. Because a book is like a friend to me. A book is someone that you can lay down, put down, go back, pick it up whenever you're ready. And it's something that is so dynamic that when you take the time to read, it actually expands your world, it expands your life, it makes you aware that human beings have been going through various experiences, well, I say for millions of years, and here we are at a very critical time in American history. We're celebrating the 250th anniversary of this country, and at the same time, we've got all kinds of chaos that's occurring. I would like for both of you, one at a time, of course, to give out your website. Richard, would you give out your website so people could find out about your material, your book?
My website is just richardfallquist.com.
And Fallquist is Fallquist, richardfallquist.com.
Correct.
There we go.
And I'd like to, can I just say,
Sure.
I'm fascinated by Ray's books.
Good.
Really, I'm going to buy your books. I think your stories are fascinating. So.
I love the diversity.
Even though you don't like my operas, that's okay.
That doesn't mean I won't like your book, but no, I appreciate that.
The diversity to me is magic. It's just wonderful, and I love it. And Ray, give out your website.
Sure, it's raydeptulaauthor.com, and I know my name's not the easiest, but it's so RAYDEPTULA author.com.
Yes, and for those of you that are watching, I want you to know that their websites are definitely going to be in the credits. So when you're watching the program and you go to the end of the program, then just put it on hold and you can see their websites and information right there. So when we have guests on the show, the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions, you notice probably, if you've watched my other programs, we have a very, very diversified subject matter. And that's what this show was about. Why is reading so important? Because it encourages you to expand your mind, to enable you to realize that the human experience repeats itself over and over again. But education is so important to stepping out of what I call the quagmire of confusion that so many times we get stuck in. I can tell you, I've had my moments. So it is very, very important that you take the time to read, and I hope with our next program that we are going to be planning on filming coming up, well, I hope you'll join me then. I want to thank both of you gentlemen. Richard Fallquist, I want to thank you. Ray Deptula, excuse me, I called you Rod, and that's wrong. But Ray, that's the problem with a busy mind, you know, when you have that. But Ray, it's been a delight having you and Richard, and I will repeat the spelling of your last name, Deptula, Deptula. And that is very important, but it's also in the credits. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me. It has been a delight.
You, Donna. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been my pleasure.
Have a great day.
You have been listening to the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions. The audio version of this program will also be heard on the Donna Sebo Show radio broadcast. We are delighted you were able to join us and invite you to share this programming with your friends and family. Have a rich and fulfilling life.